So I really like Zen koans. I'm sure most watching this are familiar, but if not, there are these little stories that, in some ways, trick the mind, kind of stun the mind, and they're helpful in some capacity. In fact, I read my kids, I have for years, this book called Zen Shorts. It has some, and there's one in particular called The Farmer's Luck. If you're not familiar with it, and maybe you are, there's this story of a horse running away, and the neighbors say, "Oh, that's such bad luck," and the farmer says, "Maybe," and then the horse comes back and brings another horse, and they say, "Oh, that's such good luck," and he says, "Maybe," and then his son gets on, breaks his leg. They say, "Oh," on the new horse, and they say, "Such bad luck," and the farmer says, "Maybe." And really the idea is that we don't really know whether something is good or bad. Intellectually, this koan does about as much as it can possibly do by attempting to explain that good and bad can't really be determined. Although logically the brain wants to still try to figure it out or attach meaning to these certain things, and you can, the mind will still try to make sense logically of what the farmer is saying and feeling. This is all before awakening. As an example of what living in the world is like post-awakening, maybe to the notion of something being good or bad is exactly the answer. And in fact, there's another version of the story where I believe it's another series of events flip-flopping back and forth, and the monk says, he says something like, "Is it so?" And in fact, that actually might be a better response than maybe. Maybe is a neutral reaction to someone saying something's good or bad. But in the full acceptance of what is, there is no good. There is no bad. There's only what's happening. So even though the body mind may want to make something good or bad, and even with the reading or the hearing of such a koan, the mind will still try to logically connect the dots by maybe saying something like, "Yeah, things happen, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad, and so it all makes out in the middle." That's all fine and well, but that's not it. And yet it is it. It exists. It's there. It's allowed. Maybe. Is it so? Oh, that's interesting. All of these quote-unquote neutral responses, and even neutral is taking a position. So that's not quite it either. Is the default setting post-awakening. I was speaking with my mother a couple of weeks ago, and we were just doing a normal check-in, and she said, "So what are you excited about?" And I said, "Well, what I should have said is just like, everything." But I like being honest with her, and I said, "Well, I don't really get excited about things." And she, her response was, at first, was of concern. She said, "Oh," and she had the voice sounded as if I was telling her that life didn't matter anymore, or I was on the road to sharing some sort of sad story about how things don't matter, and it's just simply not the case. So I went on to explain to her that it wasn't bad and it wasn't good. It was just this. Everything is as it should be. And that joy arises because it does, when it does. It comes and goes. Energetic tensions happen, energetic contractions happen through some conditioning and programming, or just because they happen. But that there's no longer an element of joy or excitement or happiness based on external worldly things. Anything outside. No events, no things create excitement, especially nothing in the future. And yet excitement can arise, just like joy can arise, just like fear can arise. I do think it's fascinating, and some of these Zen koans are very, very old. And I've read them for years. This book I've read for 8+ years to my kids. And for most of those years, the farmer's luck story appeared to just be a lesson. It was a lesson for the mind. And then the truth of that message started to seep in, and maybe that's the purpose. Maybe that's the reason that I enjoyed reading it to kids, and obviously that's probably the purpose of them being created in the first place. But the difference is that the perception that the farmer was somehow logically or intellectually taking that approach as to how things were working. At least that's what was happening here. And the true knowing that the maybe response to events and conditions being labeled as good or bad is enlightenment, is awakening. I will post the Farmer's Luck, and if I can find the other one about the monk, I'll post that as well. See, the ego mind, highs and lows are what life is made of. And not only that, there's so much importance placed on those highs and lows. We've got to search for the highs and sustain them as long as possible. We've got to deal with the lows and get rid of them. I suppose that's fine, but it's not the truth. There's a phrase in the Upanishads talking about the separate being tastes the sweet and the bitter, and tries to get rid of the bitter and keep the sweet. And the realized self tastes both and makes no judgment about either. The middle way of the pathless path is freedom. No focus on highs, no focus on lows. Just the focus on what is on this.